All right, I suppose we should start recording the podcast then.
I guess.
Yeah, let's do this thing.
I'll try sound excited.
Yeah, exactly. Woo! Yippee! All right. Hey, you, and welcome. We actually are pretty excited.
I am excited for
today's episode. It's a really good story.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the That Chapter podcast, as you probably know, because you clicked that dirty little button to get onto it. My name is Mike. I'm joined once again by my bosom buddy, Dirty Keith.
Pod pals,
Exactly.
yeah.
Junior associate. Yeah, what's going on?
Not much, man. Not much. Getting ready to go away next week, so that's gonna be a bit of fun.
Keith's going on his holidays.
Gonna be
He's
hollybubs.
leaving me, or rather, I'm telling him to leave.
Yeah.
I've had enough of your
Get out of
shit.
here. Yeah.
By popular demand, Keith, you're kicked off the podcast.
Every now and again, I just need to get out of Michael's hair.
yeah, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. So
But,
you're looking forward to your little holidays?
Yeah.
You're going to pedophile once again?
I wish we were going to Puydefal.
Yeah, I know.
But we are going back to France. So should be a bit of crack, get some wine, get some croissants.
Keith just said he wished he was going back to pedophile, by the way, guys, and he licked his lips. Let the record show.
So it is a place called Puy-de-Fou in France, and it's amazing. You should look it up. But it does sound a lot like pedophile.
It is pedophile. Yeah, I'm not changing how I pronounce it. Let's be honest.
It's not a theme park.
Where are you going now?
South of France. That's all the details I have. My wife booked everything, so I'm just getting on the plane and I'm going.
Very good.
So I'm looking forward to it. Wherever we're going. It's gonna be good fun. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And the ghost is in residence in your house while you're gone.
Oh, yeah. So
you said that very excitedly.
I do actually have a little bit a story of the ghost.
Okay.
So and this only happened yesterday.
Oh shit!
It was weird. So I was downstairs. It was late enough because I was reading a book about what we're going to be talking about today. So it was around like 11:30ish. So late-ish. And my wife was upstairs, and then I heard her like taking a phone call, which is weird at that time. That's late. But I could hear her like, hello? Yeah. And like I couldn't hear the exact conversation, but you know the kind of like the melody of a phone call. Like,
yeah.
Like that sort of thing.
That's pretty accurate.
Thank you. Yeah. So I couldn't make out what was being said, but she was definitely on the phone to someone. And then I went up like 5 minutes later and I was like, I must ask her, who's calling her this time? That's late.
Yeah, who? I demand to know.
Who is it? And she was fast asleep.
Wow.
So I said to her the next day after work, I forgot about it. And then the next day I was like, who called you last night, by the way? She's like, no one called me. I was like, you're on the phone to someone. She's like, no. And we had a look at her phone. And
you snooped around?
Well, we both looked at the phone to see the call logs. And there was no calls at that time. And she was like, oh, maybe I was sleep talking. And I was like, no, because when she sleep talks, she just talks shite. It's just like, it's tired. Like, $2? Get out of here.
Yeah. Are you sure it wasn't a neighbor or car outside? Because sometimes you have somebody talking on their car stereo speaker system, like taking a voice, hands-free call. It can be really, really loud. So sometimes that can be.
Yeah, it was definitely my wife speaking though.
Wow. Oh, yeah, you recognize the voice like
that. Yeah, that was the thing. Yeah, it was definitely her. And I was like 100% sure it was definitely her talking. But that was weird. But yeah, we've kind of had that before in the house where I thought I heard her calling me and she thought I was calling her. Turned out neither of us were doing that. So I think someone mentioned before it's like a mimic in the house. A mimic ghost. That's mimicking
Sounds
stuff.
like it.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Is Keith's house haunted or is his mental illness getting worse?
Stronger, yeah.
You be the judge.
The carbon monoxide alarm did stop beeping after the batteries run out, so I don't know.
Yeah. Problem solved, really. You just take the batteries out. All right, well, for Mike's housekeeping, what horror movies? I know the folks at home, the fans are asking, Malibu Mike, where are you? So I did watch one horror movie over the last week since we last recorded. I watched, I've already forgotten the name. That's how forgettable the movie was. In a Violent Nature.
Oh yes, I've been actually looking forward to seeing that. That's the movie from the point of view of the serial killer.
Yes, that's exactly it. And let me stop you right there. Don't look forward to it.
Oh no,
it was not very good at all.
That's
it was a snooze fest.
That sucks. Okay.
So yeah, the whole hook of the movie is that it's told from a serial killer's point of view, but the serial killer is not like a Hannibal or like a charismatic serial killer. He's mindless. Like think of
Jason X or
like Michael Myers or whatever, just stone, doesn't say a word. So the movie is set in some forest somewhere in the woods. It's very kind of cliche. These teens go into the woods and then they steal a locket that's been left beside an old burned out fire tower, and then he comes up from the ground and is in the hunt to get it back.
Okay.
And he's just marching around and he's like violently killing all of these. I presume they're supposed to be teenagers, but they're clearly like 35-year-olds casted as teenagers. They're also like extremely annoying, so he's going around brutally murdering them, and you're like, good.
Yeah.
Please kill them. Yeah, they're all extremely unlikable. This
If you
is
don't,
great.
I will.
Yeah. And it's funny because you're like, wow, this is great. I'm happy he's killing them all. But you're also like there's no characters really in the movie at all.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just very boring because the person you're following is just literally a walking stone.
Yeah.
And
okay,
the people he's killing are. It's not good at all. Honestly, like the hook is the only interesting thing about it. The hook was done very poorly, if you ask me. It should have been done from like an interesting serial killer's point of view, maybe. That would have been a lot better. Rather than just this mindless guy going around. Yeah.
Because that's the thing. I always find like I would have loved, and that's why I was really looking forward to the movie, because like I love like the anti-hero, you know, and like I think their story is so interesting as well. Like, why they got this way, why they're so angry, and sometimes you're kind of rooting for them a little bit. Like a movie like that would be kind of cool, where it's a serial killer's like, like it's bad what he's doing, but I see where he's coming from.
Yeah,
you know? That'd be kind of cool.
Well, this one, the only thing you can see where he's coming from is just like breathing, basically, and just walking around. Like there is some.
I can do that myself after walking
upstairs. A vague plot of 50 years earlier there was like a massacre. The kid, he was a kid who was, annoying people, so they pushed him off the fire tower, and then he's avenging, yada yada yada, a very kind of shit story. And then, so he goes around murdering these people to get the locket back, like brutally murdering them, and then the movie just sort of ends.
Okay.
Yeah, just that's it, and then the movie's just over, and it's like, okay. I think at one point I did sort of like, okay, let's move on. Let's giddy up with this movie. Anyway, it wasn't very good.
Okay.
So,
the thumbs up scale?
Thumbs down.
Thumbs down. 2 thumbs down.
Oh, not 2 thumbs down. Okay. It wasn't like, what's that other movie I watched there a couple of weeks ago that was shite? Deborah Logan.
Oh,
that was like fucking 2 thumbs beneath the floor.
I'm
just giving
you
this
stirred
movie...
up a couple of comments, by the way, on YouTube videos.
I did.
People defending the movie.
Well, they're wrong, so I don't give a shit. The movie sucked. And that's just my opinion, folks. Feel free to disagree, but also know that you're wrong if you disagree, because that movie was not good. Yeah, so 1 thumbs down In a Violent Nature. But you know what, folks? Stay tuned for next week, and I'll have some more horror movies for you. Yeah, let's see what we go. Hopefully something good.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. All right, and speaking of something good, let's get into today's story. For today's one, we're heading to the East Texas, West Arkansas border territory. Or to be more specific, to the creatively named city of Texarkana. The whole region is itself an interesting place, split into 2. One half is a city in Bowie County, Texas, and the other side is a city in Miller County, Arkansas. The area is almost actually in 3 states, the whole Texarkana area being very close to Louisiana as well. Hence, that's where the Anna comes from, Texarkana. As a whole, it isn't officially a dual municipality, but instead the 2 are considered twin cities. So Texarkana is not really 1 city, it's 2 cities, as they each have their own governments, complete with a mayor, police force, and fire department. The residents of each of the cities certainly embrace the connection, with the shared state line avenue being split between the 2 states, while each community has its own idiosyncrasies and culture.
The name Texarkana, it really kind of reminds me of, when It's Always Sunny, when they're trying to come up with a name for the board game, and they just come up with Charlie McDennis. It's like an amalgamation of like all their names.
Yeah, that's exactly
like
it. It's where Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana border to, shit, I'm fucking out of ideas here.
Texarkana, Electric Boogaloo 2.
Yeah. So Texarkana wasn't always the populous place it is today. In fact, I'm pretty sure the only reason most of you might have heard of the place to begin with is because of the subject of today's L podcast. And actually, the famous movie it spawned. The movie is more famous than the actual reality, which is more horrifying. Well, it's not about Texarkana exactly, the movie I'm talking about. It's about a fictionalized version of the horrific events that took place there. And there's something about the story behind The Town That Dreaded Sundown, that's the movie, that feels like it only could have happened there in Texarkana. Normally, if you sit down to watch a movie about events in the East Texas, West Arkansas area, I'm sure you're probably, expecting Stetsons, cults, and honorable people doing God's work at the end of a 45. I doubt you'd conjure up images of Jason Voorhees stalking young lovers through the woods, but that's exactly what you're gonna get. Literally. The imagery of the movie, which was inspired by the imagery of the real case in turn, inspired the look of the Jason Voorhees character in Friday the 13th Part 2. The story of the Moonlight killer, the Texarkana Phantom, is a Jason Voorhees type story.
Yeah.
It is kind of where I think a lot of urban legends and these kind of that cliche of the killer chasing the young lovers through the woods, people being murdered on Lover's Lane. It comes from this story, which is a real story, and it's pretty gruesome.
It is cool. Yeah. Well, not cool, but like the movie's cool.
Okay. I've never actually seen the movie.
Have you not?
No.
You know what's wild? So the movie...
Maybe it should be on my next. People can disagree with in the comments now.
Oh, there we go. It's mad that, like, do you know the iconic Jason hockey mask?
Yeah.
That doesn't come in until the third movie.
Oh, really?
Before they just he had a bag in his head.
Oh,
with like an eye hole cut out.
Well, I remember that from the first one. But
I'm pretty sure for the second as well. And then it's only the third film that he gets the hockey mask.
All right, so the darkest chapter in Texarkana's history, and there's been a few, happened in just under 4 months, between February 22nd and May 3rd, 1946. The US and the world as a whole was still knee-deep in the struggle of recovery from the horrors that had scarred the first half of the 20th century. World War II had only just finished a matter of months earlier. Though the Korean War was still a few years away, for the first time in a long time there was relative peace. The last thing anyone in the rural southern United States was expecting was to be in constant fear of their lives once again, folks. This time at home.
Ooh. Good thing we've moved past fear as a society. And everything is going swimmingly.
Exactly. I love it. So what would become known as the Texarkana Moonlight murders actually began with not even a murder at all, though it wasn't out of intention for the attacker. This first incident is very much like The Strangers mixed with Jason Voorhees' urban legend.
Yeah.
So the first appearance of the man, who would become known in some parts as the Phantom, happened February 22nd, 1946, on the Texas side of town in Bowie County. That evening, two young lovers, 24-year-old Jimmy Hollis and 19-year-old Mary Jean Larry, had just been to see a movie at a downtown cinema and then had gone for a drive around in Jimmy's car, looking for a place to do what young lovers do, when they decided to drive to a secluded road on the very edge of the city's limits.
They just seen House of Dracula.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a film with 5 monsters in it. It's got Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mad Doctor, and the Hunchback, which seems a bit cruel to call her a monster.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's be honest. It sounds like she is. That sounds like kind of sort of like an Avengers of horror movies.
I know, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
That's a lot of horror in one movie.
They should redo that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I think they tried to with the dark and twisted cinematic universe.
With the Mummy with Tom Cruise.
It started with the Mummy with Tom Cruise, but then that flopped, and then they just...
Dracula Untold.
Oh yeah, there was Dracula Untold. I've only ever seen bits of that. I never watched the whole thing. But there was supposed to be like a Javier Bardem movie and a Johnny Depp movie, and then they were all gonna team up. And yeah, they announced it, and then one movie flopped, and they're like, let's just forget about that.
They just didn't try hard enough. They should do it again. I'd watch it. Do it for me.
Okay. Producers over at Universal Studios, listen up.
I won't even go. I'll stream it. Like
yeah, exactly. I'll just pirate it. So while the road they ended up on after watching the movie, looking for a quiet little place to do some lovey-dovey, the road was less than 100 meters from the nearest houses in the city. It wasn't like far out of the way, but it was far enough out of the way that the couple could have some little cuddles without worrying too much about someone accidentally stumbling across them. The road was known by local teens for that very reason. It was a real lover's lane type deal. Jimmy and Mary, they did want privacy. Not because they were, sneaking teens. Mary was 19, Jimmy was 24. But rather, they were both married. Twists! Albeit they were actually both on the brink of their own divorces. The couple had been parked for less than 10 minutes when suddenly the pair were blinded by a beam of a flashlight being shown directly through the driver's side window. Jimmy Hollis couldn't see who was on the other end of the flashlight, but it's very likely he assumed it was a police officer, as Jimmy immediately tried to tell the person that they had the wrong man. Once his vision settled, however, Jimmy and Mary both realized very quickly that the man with the flashlight was definitely not a police officer. The man, standing around 6 feet tall, cut and imposing. Over his face, he wore a white hood that looked to have been fashioned from a pillowcase. Only 2 small holes for his unblinking eyes to peer out. In any other context, the sight might have been almost comical, but staring in your face with a torch in one hand and a pistol in the other, it would have been utterly terrifying. The hooded man told Jimmy, "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so you do what I say." The man then demanded that both Jimmy and Mary get out of the car before he told Jimmy to take off his trousers. Curiously, he continued to use a weird turn of phrase to go with the choice of addressing Jimmy as fellow. Also, the man asked Jimmy to remove his breeches, not exactly his trousers. Jimmy did everything the man asked, but it made no difference. Suddenly, there was an almighty cracking sound. It was significant enough that Mary thought Jimmy had been shot. In fact, he'd been bashed in the head with the butt of the strange man's pistol. Later, when the extent of Jimmy's injuries were revealed, police would surmise that the sound she heard was Jimmy's skull cracking under the impact. The lone hit felled Jimmy and he lay prone and unconscious, leaving Mary alone in the attacker's sights. Mary, still confused by the sudden explosion of violence, tried to reason with the man. Hoping robbery was his motive, she told him she had no money, nor did Jimmy. She even opened Jimmy's wallet to show she wasn't lying. She was crying and pleading, but it meant nothing to the attacker. The man struck her hard, likely with the butt of his gun again, though she couldn't be sure as she'd been knocked half out of it by the blow. Grounded by the assault, the masked man then told Mary to get up and run. She struggled to her feet and eventually managed to get her legs working enough to break into a jog, then into a sprint. Soon, though, after running, she thought she'd spotted her salvation. Parked up just ahead to the side of the road was another car. She hoped it was another couple, but once she got close enough, she realized her mistake. The car was empty. I honestly picture this next moment like something from a slasher movie, but this is what actually happened. As Mary was at the car, she turned around, and standing in front of her was the hooded man. He'd caught up to her. The man calmly asked why she ran, to which she replied, "Because you told me to." Little did she know she was already playing the attacker's game. He called her a liar and knocked her to the ground. Mary later said that she told the man, "Go ahead and kill me." But the man had other, darker intentions. The man then assaulted her with the barrel of his gun. After the sexual assault, Mary managed to fight to her feet and she ran again. This time she didn't stop until she got to a house. Mary ran flat out for half a mile till reaching it. Mary knocked and called out, managing to wake the homeowners who took her in and called the police. At this time, she thought Jimmy, who was still back at the car, was dead. In fact, he regained consciousness and was able to flag down a passing driver who got onto a phone and called for the police. County Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley, along with 3 of his deputies, went straight to the scene, arriving within half an hour of the attack. They searched the area as best they could, but determined that the attacker was long gone.
Here's something terrifying. So when the police arrived, the car that Mary had run to for help initially, that was gone. And it was never identified by the police, which means it was very likely that Mary actually ran straight to the attacker's car.
I think that's probably what the car was.
Yeah,
you know?
Which is horrifying.
Yeah.
When Jimmy regained consciousness, he staggered in his underwear to Richmond Road and he managed to flag down a passing car. However, the driver wouldn't actually give him a lift. I'm not sure why. Maybe he didn't want to get blood in his car.
Well, it's got this bloody guy with no trousers on.
Yeah. Let me in.
How about no?
But no. Instead, the driver, he sped away towards town and he called the Texarkana funeral home, which I thought was a bit premature.
Yeah, that's a... okay, fair enough.
But apparently the mortuary also had an ambulance that served the local hospital. So it was about 15 minutes then that the ambulance and the police made their way up to Lover's Lane and met him.
And rescued him, yeah. So both Jimmy and Mary were interviewed in hospital, but each gave a slightly different description. Now, it's far from a rare occurrence for witnesses and even victims to give varying accounts of the exact same person. In fact, it's more suspicious when the 2 accounts match up exactly. Considering the stress of the moment, it's amazing that the couple were able to come up with anything at all. The one thing the couple could agree on was the height and age range of this hooded, masked psychopath. Both thought that it was a man in his 20s or 30s, and he was around probably 6-ish feet tall. Other than that though, the 2 disagreed on the man's skin color. Jimmy said he thought he had been a tanned white guy, but Mary, who unfortunately had been a lot closer to him as he had assaulted her, she could see under the hood, and she thought that this guy had a light black skin. Naturally, when the police though first heard of the attack, they headed for what the obvious choice you think it would be. Mary's husband, the person she was in the middle of divorcing. Ultimately, Mary did need a lot of stitches and would be kept in hospital overnight, but was allowed to go back home the next day. Jimmy Hollis spent more than a week in hospital, and much longer recovering at home from 2 severe skull fractures. Both of them carried far deeper psychological scars from that night though, long after the physical wounds had healed. So as for the investigation into what happened and their suspect, Now, the sheriff, he had some suspicions, and he seriously believed that the couple probably knew who this masked man was, but were covering for him, which was weird kind of thing to jump to. I mean, it's kind of weird, like insane that he thought that, especially after the ordeal Mary had gone through. I mean, she at one point had literally asked him to shoot her.
Yeah.
She'd asked to die. And then she got up and ran. It's kind of like crazy. It's crazy that she would cover up after this horrific ordeal. Whoever this would be, you would want them like...
Well, behind bars.
Yeah, for sure. After the experience, Mary struggled to sleep, and when she did, she was plagued by nightmares. Jimmy came within millimeters of dying. His skull was literally smashed to pieces. I can't think of a single reason why either of them would protect someone who did that, let alone both of them would protect them. But, as I said, the police first port of call was Mary's husband, who she was in the process of divorcing. But that one was really a non-starter. Fortunately for him, he had a very good alibi, having been with other people at the time of the attack. Even before he alibied out, though, both Mary and Jimmy said they heard the man's voice, and other than saying he sounded local, or at least, he didn't sound foreign, the chances of it being somebody they knew was unlikely. In the wake of the attack, rumors swirled, and things did get a little tense for kids parking on lovers' lanes, but after a week or two, tensions had eased, and the attack on Mary and Jimmy was beginning to fade into memory. Then a third week passed, and suddenly, everyone was talking about the attack on the two lovers again. Only this time, it wasn't Mary and Jimmy, and the victims were not able to tell anyone what had happened to them.
Yeah, it's crazy that the sheriff thought that they were covering for their attacker, like you said. Like, in particular, the police, they badgered Mary for months, insisting that she knew the gunman's name, an allegation that she denied for the remainder of her life. In terms of motive, authorities, they ruled out robbery, and they made no mention of the sexual assault in the early stages of the investigation. And they'd no suspects, though there was one report that claimed 6 people were arrested and released after questioning. But I suppose it was easy for the police, even comforting, to chalk it up to jealousy or revenge. Anything but the idea that there was a random killer lurking out there.
That's the worst possible thing you can have.
Exactly. And I guess the police at the time, they didn't fully understand the concept of serial killers. This wouldn't have even been in their vocabulary until the 1970s.
Yeah.
When the FBI, they began their studies and profiling. Before that, killers without clear motives, they were just they were misunderstood, miscategorized, or just simply seen as madmen.
He's just a character. He's a bit of a lad. He's a bit of a madman, He's a local loony.
They hadn't got a clue what they were dealing with.
Yeah. They didn't know their thumb from their asshole at this point. But then the killer struck again. A month on from the first attack, early on the rainy morning of Sunday, March 24th, 1946, a driver passing by a similar lover's lane to the first one, again in Bowie County, spotted a car, an Oldsmobile sedan that looked sort of off. It was a very strange time for a car to be in such a place. So the driver pulled over to check it out, see if anybody needed help. Nearby was a lot of blood staining the dirt. A lot of blood. Approaching the car, there was more blood running under the bottom of the car. And inside was the source of the pooling and splattered blood. The body of 29-year-old Richard Griffin was on his knees between the front seats, his head resting on his hands, which were crossed in front of him, almost like he was praying. His trousers pockets were turned inside out, like Richard had been proving they were empty. Behind Richard, laying on a blanket next to her open purse, was the body of his girlfriend, 17-year-old Polly Ann Moore. Polly was laid face down on the back seats of Richard's car. An analysis of the scene determined that Richard had been shot twice in the back of the head whilst inside the car. Polly had also been shot twice in the back of the head, but the bloody blanket outside indicated that she had been killed outside of the car and then moved into the back seat post-mortem. The killer clearly didn't want to risk them walking away and being able to tell their tale, just like Jimmy and Mary had. Also found at the scene was several .32 caliber spent casings that were likely ejected from a semi-auto pistol left by the killer. Victim Richard Griffin had recently been discharged from the US Navy. Polly had recently graduated from Atlanta High School in Texas and was working at the Red River Arsenal, an armed forces depot. The couple had only been seeing each other for less than 6 weeks when they were killed. And, don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he was 29 and she was 17. Yeah. But this was in the 40s when that was cool, I guess.
Yeah, we'll skip past that.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on. Unfortunately, the heavy rain that fell after the murders had washed away a lot of potential evidence, including any footprints or fingerprints on the body of the vehicle. As soon as the state police, along with the sheriff and his deputies, heard about the murders, everyone knew there was a possible connection to the February attacks on Jimmy and Mary. It didn't take long for everybody to be in agreement that they were very likely looking for a single perpetrator for both crimes. The person had clearly learned their lesson from their first attempt. More worryingly, though, that meant a huge escalation in the level of violence they were willing to commit. The violence also seemed, terrifyingly, to be the whole point behind the attack. Despite the show of turning out pockets and an open purse, Polly's class ring had been completely ignored. Sure, a small amount of cash might have been taken, but that was more of a happy bonus rather than the real motivating factor behind the crime. Whoever had done this was out to hurt people, for their own satisfaction. Rumor around town was that Polly had also been sexually assaulted, but this was never substantiated by the authorities.
There was a lot of confusion around the forensic evidence. So both victims were shot with .32 caliber pistol, and since no weapon was found at the scene, authorities they were able to rule out a murder-suicide. But early reports said each victim was shot once. Then later accounts added that a second wound for Griffin. Then another report published decades later claimed that both were shot twice. Ballistics evidence, that was just as messy. Some say that one cartridge case was found nearby, others say two, or even several. In a FBI memo from May 15th, 1946, it mentioned that only one bullet and 2 shell casings were recovered. Then, most sources they agree that there was no useful fingerprints taken from the car. But oddly, another FBI document filed several months later requested the comparison of a suspect's prints to the unidentified fingerprints lifted from the crime scene. So to me, it just kind of shows how unprepared and under-resourced the police were when they couldn't even get the basics of forensics right, like preserving and collecting evidence. And there was later a true crime analysis and historians, they highlight the forensic mishandling as a major factor in this case's outcome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this was back in the 40s when police weren't as well trained, and, this is also in the middle of fucking nowhere, It's not like it was in, downtown New York where the police were really used to this kind of shit.
Yeah.
So when news broke of the murders of Richard and Polly, it didn't take long for fear levels around the Texas side of the border to skyrocket. While Texarkana wasn't the safest place in the world in the 1940s, it was far from the worst. A double murder, and then what was recontextualized as an attempted double murder, would have been a notable event in even the roughest of towns. Polly, being 17, was the youngest victim so far. Richard, the oldest, at 29, but as I said, let's swiftly move on from that. The next duo of victims would lower the average age even further. At around 6:30 in the morning of Sunday, April 14th, less than 3 weeks on since Richard and Polly were found murdered, the aftermath of a second double murder was discovered. The victims this time, 16-year-old Paul Martin and 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker. The couple were last seen 5 hours before they were found dead, when Paul had picked Betty Jo up from a performance at the VFW Club on West 4th and Oak Street, again, Texas side of Texarkana. After the musical performance, which finished around 1 a.m, Betty Jo would usually have been given a ride home by one of the adults to make sure she was safe. But on this night, Betty Jo had been invited to a friend's house for a sleepover after her performance. Paul Martin knew Betty Jo from school and had offered to drive her over himself, but the two took a little detour to a popular hangout spot among local teens at Spring Lake Park for maybe a cheeky makeout session. What happened next is unknown, but the evidence indicated that the two were killed soon after they pulled up. Paul Martin's body was found first, at 6:30 a.m, by a family who'd taken a shortcut through the woods. His body was found at the northern edge of the park, lying on his left side, with 4 separate gunshot wounds. Those injuries included being shot through the back of his neck, again in the ribs from behind, and a much more obviously fatal wound to his face, entering through his nose. A 4th wound through his right hand was likely, caused by Paul attempting to shield himself from the attacker's bullet. With the discovery of Paul's body, a search was launched immediately for Betty Jo's whereabouts by Sheriff Presley and his men. It took close to 6 hours, but the searchers eventually found her, 2 miles from where they found Paul. The positioning of Betty Jo revealed another new escalation to the killer's game. She appeared to have been posed after being killed. Her coat had been neatly buttoned up, and her right hand placed in the pocket. If it hadn't been for the gunshot wounds to her face and chest, she might have, appeared to have been simply sleeping. Cartridges left at the scene quickly revealed that the weapon used was of the same type and caliber that had been used to murder Richard and Polly, a .32 semi-auto pistol. Paul's car was found still parked at Spring Lake Park, the keys left in the ignition. This was around 3 miles from where Betty Jo was found and 1.5 from where Paul was found. Again, with the posing of Betty Jo, the killer seemed to have given up any pretense of a robbery being the main motive, though her saxophone was missing. News of the 2 young teens being brutally gunned down spread like wildfire. And this was a super escalation because everybody else had been attacked at their car, killed in their car.
Yeah.
They were miles from their car.
Yeah.
He'd either, it seems like he'd walked them out, gone to their car while they were inside at gunpoint, ordered them out, and then forced them to march through the park, and then eventually murdered them separately.
He was getting more confident. He was able to have complete control of the situation.
Yeah. Scary. Betty Jo's loss, with her being just 15 and known around town as a gifted musician, hit hard. Many had seen her perform with her band, and none of them expected April 13th to be her final performance. The funerals of both teens was a huge occasion in the community, which quickly raised a reward fund of more than $5,000 for information leading to the capture of whoever had done such a heinous thing. To say people were nervous was an understatement. Clearly, no one was off limits for this killer, and his crimes were only growing more and more sophisticated. As Keith said, the concept of a serial killer didn't even exist yet. There was no playbook for how to deal with this. It's only in relatively recent times that, patterns, analysis, all that kind of stuff has even existed. These crimes didn't yet fall under the remit of the FBI. But in Texas, the next best thing they had were the Texas Rangers. In fact, many of the first FBI agents had background with the Texas Rangers. The FBI itself was heavily inspired by the Texas Rangers organization. When a crime was too big or complex for local law, the sheriff or even state police could call on the Rangers for help. Established in 1823 by the founder of Austin, Stephen F. Austin himself, that's the second time he's come up recently. Isn't that a weird little coincidence?
Oh, it is actually.
We did it with the Servant Girl Annihilator.
Yeah,
this is funny how these things will come up. So the Rangers would often tread a fine line between law enforcement and then being outlaw boys themselves. And none were better at that, at being good old boys, old Texas Rangers, than the man they called in to hunt down the Phantom Killer of Texarkana, which is what he was given a name, the Phantom Killer of Texarkana. Who they called in was Manuel Trezazas Gonzalez. Bringing in Gonzalez, also known as El Lobo Solo, the Lone Wolf, was basically, he was hot shit. He was like bringing in Columbo. I don't know, maybe somebody better than Columbo. I don't know, Rambo.
Yes, one more thing.
Okay, this guy was much more of a badass than Columbo.
I've never heard Columbo called badass.
Okay, he's the first super detective that came to my head. Okay, who's a better example then of El Lobo Solo? And who would he be? Okay, maybe like a Chuck Norris type. This guy's cool. He goes around, he beats the shit out of people, and he gets the bad guys one way or the other. So yeah, they brought in the big guns. By the time he joined the sheriff and his deputies, Gonzalez, El Lobo Solo, already had more than 75 justified kills in his line of duty. Yeah, he was literally the guy who, dead or alive, he's like, first one is fine with me. Yeah. He was alive till I shot him. He was, type of guy. He just loved killing outlaws. Yeah. Basically, he was kind of like a serial killer, but he found a way to legalize being a serial killer when you think about it. Yeah, Gonzalez, he hunted everything from drug dealers to bootleggers to the worst type of killers.
Yeah, this guy was awesome. Apparently, the police hated him, though.
I can imagine.
Yeah, one of the county's sheriff deputies said that the Lone Wolf, his main contribution to the case, seemed to be his dramatic descents down the hotel staircase, decked out with his ornate revolvers, a white Stetson, and then charming the press, especially the young female reporters.
Oh.
He was a showman. They were just jealous. But in fairness, though, he was badass. There was a story. So in 1943, he was part of this shootout with a pair of escaped convicts in New Ruston. One had died behind the wheel of the bullet-ridden getaway car. The other decided to play dead in the floorboard of the car. Then when the Lone Wolf approached the car, he got shot in the shoulder. But he didn't flinch. Instead, the Lone Wolf fired back at point-blank range, pumping 5 slugs into the man. for an instant kill.
Yeah.
His only complaint afterward was his shirt was ruined and probably wouldn't come clean. That's badass, man.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah,
I like this guy.
I like him too.
Yeah, but he does seem like a dick, as we will get into. Yeah. And bringing in a Lobo Solo, we'll see the sheriff was like, bring in your best guy, put your top man on the case. And so they brought in Gonzalez. He thought this would calm people down. Look, we got our top man is on the job. And it's like, the community, that backfired.
Yeah,
he thought this would calm people down. It did not.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine it's like, oh, if the situation is that serious, that's probably not a good thing.
He riled people up.
Exactly. Yeah. So, when asked what he thought people should do with the killer on the loose by a reporter, Gonzalez Lobo Solo said that he would, this is what he said to calm down the community. Quote, tell them to check the locks and bolts on their downs and get a double-barreled shotgun to take care of any intruders who try to get in. So he's literally like, we're panicked, you're all gonna fucking die! Yeah. In a funny little aside, Gonzalez gave multiple interviews that ended every time with a promise that he would not leave Texarkana until the Phantom was caught. When he repeated the vow to Sheriff's Deputy Tillman Johnson, Johnson responded by asking if he thought about buying a house in town, because you're going to be here for a while. So how effective the wolf was, it's a matter for debate. He spent a lot of time indulging in his celebrity status and was accused of claiming other officers' work as his own. He was like, kill Hitler? Yeah, I did that. Also fought in WW2.
I was there.
Honestly, the more I read into him, the more I doubt he actually killed 75 people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm starting to think, how much of his legend is him just inventing shit? So the Ranger, they also called into question one of the first victims, Mary Larry, who, survived a brutal attack. Mary had left town after she herself had been attacked, but had returned after the murders of Richard and Polly in order to help out with the investigation, as she was one of the only witnesses to the attack. But she was constantly doubted and called a liar by the police and the Rangers. They still insisted she was lying about what happened and that she was covering. She knew the person who had attacked her and Jimmy out on Lover's Lane. Yeah. She was covering for the guy who had given her boyfriend a severe soul fracture, sexually assaulted her, and they were calling her a liar.
After she came back to help.
So Gonzalez's advice did not go unheeded. Gun sales went through the roof in Texarkana. And again, considering, part of this is Texas, that's a lot of guns. That certainly didn't help the local law enforcement, though, who had to discourage over-enthusiastic teens who thought it was a good idea to drive up, to local Lover's Lane spots, sit in their cars, armed to the teeth, hoping to bag themselves a Phantom. People were going vigilante to try and hunt down the Phantom. Initially, at least, Gonzalez was far from discouraging this type of behavior, and was even known himself to enlist local teens to act as bait in order to try and lure them. He's literally trying to get kids around. Hey, you want 50 or fucking $5?
That's so funny.
Go sit in the car in Lover's Lane, him just hiding in the bushes, hoping this guy will... Jeez Louise. Later, though, he did make a public statement asking teens not to do this and calling it a good way to get killed. As always, though, the local chatter confused matters even further. Everyone in Texarkana would have swore to you that the killer struck exactly every 3 weeks on nights when a full moon was visible, hence the moniker, the Texarkana Moonlight Killer, being added to the killer's ever-growing list of cool-ass nicknames. You got the Moonlight Killer, you got the Phantom of Texarkana. It all added to the legend and even caught the attention of national news media. So some consider the third attack, or the second double murder, the murders of Paul and Betty Jo at the park. A lot of people consider that to be the final murder of the Phantom, but there was a fourth attack on a couple. But the details were very different, so it's possible this wasn't committed by the same person. Many, though, including the authorities, do believe it to be the work of the Phantom. 20 days on from the murder of Paul and Betty Jo, or 3 weeks, on Friday, May 3rd, the Phantom crossed the border into the Arkansas side of Texarkana for a very different spin on his crimes. 37-year-old Virgil Starks and his wife, 36-year-old Katie, were at their home on their 500-acre farm in Miller County, 10 miles northeast of Texarkana. Katie was drawn to the sitting room by the sound of glass breaking. This was shortly after 9 p.m. Virgil had been sitting in his armchair with a heat pad on his ailing back, reading the newspaper. When Katie entered the room, she didn't immediately notice anything alarming. She saw her husband appear to stand, only to sit right back down again. It was only when she got closer she realized her husband was slumped over, not out of weariness, but from a devastating wound to the back of his head. The window behind him was shattered. Katie didn't know exactly what happened, but she knew her husband was dead and hurried over to the old crank-operated landline phone to call for help. Katie got to the phone, dialed for help, but before she could even be connected, she was knocked to the floor by 2 bullets to the face. In the most, Texas move of all time, frankly. Despite being shot twice in the face, Katie somehow managed to get to her feet and go for her own gun in the neighboring room. As she did so, she heard someone trying to force the back door of the house. Not knowing who or how many people there were, she instead turned and ran for the front door. She did all this half blind. Again, 2 holes in her face. Well, 3 holes now, I guess.
Yeah.
At first, she ran barefoot to her sister's house across the street, but found no one home. So instead, she went to the next house, where she got the attention of V.A. Prater. She managed to tell him that her husband Virgil was dead. Then she collapsed. V.A. Prater, her neighbor, called for backup with the good old telephone, firing a gunshot into the air.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know. That caught the attention of another neighbor, Elmer Taylor, who came running with his own rifle. And while Prater stayed with the unconscious and badly wounded Katie, Taylor took Prater's keys and got to his car. The pair were then joined by the rest of Prater's family, and they took Katie to a nearby medical center. So being in a neighboring county, and very different in many ways to the previous crimes which all occurred on Lovers Lanes, the attack on Virgil and Katie was not linked to the first. Miller County Sheriff W.E. Davis was charged with heading up the investigation and rushed to question Katie right before she was taken into surgery. She told him what happened as best she could, but obviously was in some pain and needed a lot of medical attention. It wasn't until May 11th that authorities finally publicly acknowledged the theory that all of the attacks were connected, and they called for anybody who knew of someone who had been unaccounted for during those times come forward and report them. The battle with misinformation was very real. Sheriff Davis had to question Katie again in the hospital after rumors had been spreading about Virgil having heard a car outside their house for several nights before the murder, and again right before the murder, and then had apparently told Katie he was scared of someone coming to kill him. But Katie said this was bullshit. There was no, lead up to this, there was no cars spotted, stalker behavior, and any potential vendetta was ruled out. The investigation also revealed that in this attack, Virgil and Katie attack, the weapon was different too. While previously the killer had used a .32 caliber pistol, this time the Starks were most likely shot with a .22 caliber automatic rifle. So things had been tense before. Now with a home invasion on the list of the Phantom's crimes, well, sales of locks, guns and ammunition that had already been rocketing suddenly spiked to a point it began affecting neighboring towns too. When details of the Starks' murder and attempted murder became public, even blinds were selling out. The paranoia was at a fever pitch and got so bad that police officers themselves had to tread carefully when approaching citizens in case, a jumpy person might shoot them if they approached too quickly. The bulk of Texarkana's police force, both of the Texas and Arkansas sides, had been redirected to hunt for this phantom, along with help from the FBI and the Rangers. Hundreds of officers and agents were involved, and hundreds of people were checked and cleared.
Here's something interesting.
Yes, Keith?
A few nights after Virgil Starks was buried, one of his neighbours noted lights resembling a muzzle flash from a gun inside the victim's now abandoned house.
Ooh.
So the police were called and they rushed to the house and they approached with guns drawn. So they announced that the house was surrounded and that whoever was in there had better come out with their hands up. Well, who should come out of the house but our boy El Lobo Solo, along with a female photographer from Time Life. So he explained that he had been reenacting the crime for the young lady who was taking pictures of him. And her flashbulbs were from the camera were the strange lights in the house that were mistaken for muzzle flashes.
That's cool. I bet he was like, hey, you want to see something cool?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Imagine he was like posing with his gun. Trying to do like
nothing but the gun belt. Like,
exactly. Doing like the James
Stetson hat.
The Jeff Goldblum pose and shit like that.
Yeah.
He rocks.
So funny.
I hope he's still alive. We should have him on the podcast.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's long dead. This is 1946. But if he was still alive, El Lobo Solo, come on the podcast.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you. 3 weeks after the attack on the Starks, both sides of Texarkana's community braced themselves for, once again, the potential of another attack. Maybe even this would be attack number 5. Residents remained on edge, and the authorities were on high alert, waiting for another horrible murder to hit the news. Only, the news never came, and the fear of the Phantom slowly subsided. It took a considerable amount of time, but eventually life in Texarkana returned to normal, with many unhappily accepting that the man behind the mask may never be revealed. And to date, who he was has never definitively been revealed. Now, there definitely wasn't a shortage of suspects in the Moonlight killer case. Far from it. There's a lot, so we do have to keep this podcast not 4 hours friggin' long.
Yeah.
But let's go through what the most likely
Top candidates.
Top candidates of who the killer was. We'll focus on 2, based on evidence and opinions of those closest to the case. Alright, listen up, folks! So in the eyes of the authorities and many in the public, the chief suspect was a local thief named Ewell Swinney. Swinney was 29 years old at the time of the Phantom's crimes, and was already known to the police as a habitual offender. Swinney was a pretty prolific, albeit largely petty, criminal, with a long rap sheet to his name. Most of his arrests had been, theft-related, cars mostly, and he did have a couple of charges connected to counterfeiting as well. Swinney's name first came up in a police sweep of local criminals, when it was noted that on the same night of Polly Ann Moore and Richard Griffin's murders, Sunday, March 24, in the same area, a car previously reported to have been stolen was found abandoned, and a second car was then stolen. Police watching one of the cars jumped on Swinney's wife, Peggy Swinney, when she came to collect the stolen car. So to say then that Peggy collapsed under the slightest of scrutiny was a comical understatement. Not only did she cop to Ewell stealing the cars, but she also told detectives that he had killed Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin. She went on to, they didn't even ask. But thanks.
That's want to get out of here.
Yeah. She went on to give a detailed confession of the Phantom's crimes on her husband's behalf. While Peggy was able to give details such as where the killer had left items he had taken from his victims, she also seemed unsure of others, leading to some doubt over the veracity of her statement, whereas others saw the inconsistencies as proof she was telling the truth and not lying to get her husband into trouble. Further, some detectives thought she might even be scared of her husband and was holding back in case he went after her. Then there's the possibility that she herself had been far more involved than she was leading them to believe, and the omissions and errors were intended to obscure the real level of her complicity. Ultimately, though, with a huge stack of circumstantial evidence being propped up by Peggy's testimony, the police would have had, a decent case against Ewell, but I say would have because they would have needed Peggy to testify against her husband. And basically all they had was her saying things and hearsay. None was really enough to get going. And Peggy recanted her confession, and she stopped cooperating with the investigation. Despite another 6 months digging into Ewell Swinney, the case against him was dead in the water, as the law prohibited Peggy from being forced to testify against her husband. Swinney did eventually end back up in prison for a long stretch, but it was his habitual offender status that won him the prize. There are those, though, including James Presley, the nephew of investigator Sheriff Presley, who believe Swinney's guilty plea to the habitual offender charge was essentially an unofficial deal with prosecutors in order that Swinney end up behind bars and not face the death penalty, an outcome he was allegedly terrified of. There are no records indicating that this was the case at all, but stranger things have happened off the record. Swinney's incarceration would certainly explain the Phantom's sudden disappearance. But I don't buy Swinney. Personally, he was just too much of a small-time criminal to suddenly graduate to murdering people.
Yeah.
And the only evidence they really had was his wife saying, that's him. He's the Phantom Killer. If there was some kind of secret deal as well to put him away for his habitual robbing of shit, and then, we'll put you away for that, but wink, wink, we're secretly putting you away because you're a serial killer, they would have fucking broadcast it on the news.
Oh, 100%.
That was a big get.
Yeah.
They wouldn't give a shit about the small time stuff.
Yeah.
They would be like, hey, guess who we got? We got the Phantom Killer. Isn't this great? Big W.
That's not how the law works.
Exactly. No.
Yeah, they wouldn't do that. Do you know what's interesting, though? So it's interesting that the law prevented Peggy from being forced to testify against her husband, because the day that she was arrested by the police, do you know when she went to go pick up the car?
Yeah.
Just so happened to be the exact same day that she married Ewell.
Ooh.
Probably just a happy coincidence for them, but still a very lucky one. Also, after Peggy's arrest...
so the stolen car was a wedding day gift.
There we go, could have been. Yeah. Worst honeymoon ever. Also, after Peggy's arrest, it would be another 2 weeks before Ewell he was picked up. This time he was trying to sell a stolen car. And then on his way to jail, Ewell, he turned to the deputy sheriff and asked, "What do you think they'll do to me for this? Will they give me the chair?" Which is a strange question considering at that point he had no reason to believe that he was being arrested for anything other than car theft.
Yeah.
Bit weird.
That is a bit weird, but maybe
strange.
he was just joking around. Like, oh,
Could have been. Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
But next in line, the other suspect I want to go through, I think much more likely. This guy. This guy's a lot more interesting as being a possible suspect.
He seems like a loose cannon.
This guy's interesting. This is 18-year-old university freshman at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Henry Booker Tennyson, a.k.a. the shittest nickname ever, Duty.
Duty.
So like Ewell Swinney, Henry Booker Tennyson was never on the police's radar until an out-of-the-blue confession. Only this time, it was posthumous. The 6'3", he matches it, height range. Tennyson, the 6'3" Tennyson died by suicide, November 4th, 1948, after drinking mercury cyanide. He bought the mercury cyanide a day earlier under the pretense of using it as rat poison. In his suicide note, or notes to be more accurate, he claimed the reason he was taking his own life was the guilt of having taken those of the Phantom's victims. Quote, "Why did I take my life? Well, when you committed 2 double murders, you would too. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in the city park that night and killed Mr. Starks and tried to get Mrs. Starks." I mean, if in your suicide note, you're going to commit why would you write that?
Right, yeah.
If you didn't do it in your final message to the world.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Given he was 18 years old when he died, he would have been 16 when he committed the first murders, which would be unusual, but not impossible. The confession note itself wasn't a straight-up deal either. Instead, he had written notes with clues, and even one with a riddle, which together revealed the location of the confession note. Fucking hell, this guy's like the Zodiac. He's like the
Riddler.
Yeah, it was wild. The confession note was then discovered hidden in a lockbox, inside with a fountain pen. Traces of the poison that Tennyson used to take his own life were found on the pen lid. His other notes claimed he had committed the murders when his mother had been out or asleep, so she hadn't seen him leave, therefore he had an alibi. He claimed to have disassembled the guns used and discarded the parts in different places. He gave the reason for his suicide as because, quote, "running away would not do any good. The police would find me."
He left behind 3 notes, as he said, for whoever would find the body. No one would ever publish these notes in full, but the first note, so that was discovered on a dresser in the bedroom where he died, and it was a poem/riddle titled "My Final Word," and it offered cryptic clues to unlocking a lockbox that you mentioned. The one with the confession note inside, the second note. And the police, they straight up ignored the rhyme and they just smashed the box open, which is so funny.
I don't even fuck this shit. Honestly, I probably would have done the same thing. Yeah. I'm that kind of guy. I'm like, I'm not fucking doing this. It's like kicking it till it's open.
It's just like, but I guess like it sucks for Tennyson though. Like he probably spent ages crafting that like clever little puzzle for the top detectives.
Yeah, I thought Batman was going to be solving this case.
Smashing it.
Yeah. Oh, my genius.
Yeah. But strangely though, when they found the third note, that contradicted the second confession note. So the third note read, "Please disregard all other messages which I've written. They are only thoughts which I was thinking about as possible reasons for taking my life. As I think about it, it's none of these things. They are not the reason for this incident. There is much better point to it all. Happiness. Yes, happiness. If I'm out of the way, all the family can get down to their lives." So it's basically like he was like, actually, forget it. Forget I said any of that. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So like,
I just went mad for a second.
Yeah. So like, I'm not sure what to make of these 3 notes. Like, as you kind of mentioned earlier, why would he even mention the killings if he had nothing to do with it?
Why would he write that third? Like, did he put it in the lockbox and then was like, oh fuck, I can't actually open the lock again? Why say, oh, disregard note? Why not just remove the previous notes?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the third note was somewhere else though. Say the first note was on the dresser, the second note was in the lockbox. I don't know where the third one was though.
It just like it's weird to say disregard note when you could just remove the previous note, if you know what I mean.
Like, I know what you mean. Yeah. What if they had found that note first? Like,
well, why just remove all of the notes? You're still going to kill yourself. You don't even have to kill yourself. It doesn't make any sense.
None of it makes sense.
I feel like that third one was just put in. It was him playing a little game.
Yeah.
And he was like, actually, I'm joking. Yeah. Or am I?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
He's just fucking with the police.
Well, as you can already imagine, dear listener, Tennyson definitely had his issues. He did end his own life at just 18, after all, but maybe he had good reason to. According to many, he'd been bullied throughout school and was always thought to be different to other kids. Many thought he might be gay, which back in 1946 would bring up its own complications and cruelty from people around him. His own school life does prove a sort of connection to one of the victims, Betty Jo Booker. Tennyson went to the same school as Betty Jo. He even played trombone in the school band. Betty Jo played saxophone. They said there was never any evidence, though, that the two met, let alone knew each other. But, I mean, if they're in the band, they must have known of each other.
Yeah, like how big's this band?
The bigger connection, though, came through Tennyson's job. He just so happened to work at the Paramount Theatre while he was in high school. He was an avid theatre goer himself, even after he stopped working there. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Larry had gone to see a movie at that same theatre the night they were attacked. So had Richard Griffin and Pollyann Moore. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
He's literally at the last place the victims had gone to before they were murdered. Paul Martin had also been to see a movie the night he was attacked before he'd gone to pick up Betty. Like, he has sort of a connection, or like was at least a witness.
Yeah.
Would have seen all of the victims shortly before they were killed.
Yeah.
That's
then wrote a note about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe he was the sixth monster in House of Dracula.
Oh, he was like, that's cool. I'm going to start my own band, my own gang. There was a slightly looser link to the Starks, Virgil and Katie. Katie's sister, who she and Virgil visited often, lived next door to Tennyson's friend and bandmate, a guy named James G. Freeman. Freeman was the person who gave Tennyson an alibi for the night of the Starks murders. His alibi guy, by the way, James G. Freeman, who gave him an alibi for the night of the Virgil and Katie Stark attack, he would also take his own life. He shot himself in 1973, which in fairness now, though, that's like 30 years later. So.
Right, yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's linked.
Yeah.
Freeman was also known as a bit of an odd character and would often use inappropriate language and even act inappropriately towards women. Now, it sounds a lot more like a real possibility. Could they have had some sort of arrangement, work as a team, taking turns to alibi each other out? That's an interesting theory, is Tennyson. He definitely is a stronger suspect than
I think so.
A career criminal whose wife just, he's the killer.
Yeah, I think of the other ones out of Riot, I think it's one of the strongest.
Throughout the active spree and subsequent investigation, there were all sorts of rumors and stories about who could be responsible. Some speculated that an escaped German prisoner of war was to blame. Others suspected a drifter or hitchhiker passing through, bringing murder to the towns they visited. And that's sort of the story of, much like In a Violent Nature, the story of the Moonlight Killer just sort of ends. I wonder if El Lobo Solo ended up buying a house in Texarkana because it was never solved. Let me just actually, folks, I'm going to do my quick Wikipedia aside.
Still there to this day.
Yeah, what happened to him? I'm going to just Google it. El Lobo Solo. Okay, yeah, he was invested in Texas. He retired in 1951, moved to Hollywood. He became a consultant for radio and TV, and particularly the long-running 50s radio show Tales of the Texas Rangers.
Cool.
He died of cancer, aged 85, while living in Dallas in 77. And yeah, that's sort of it. Okay, all right. Well, there you go, folks.
What a bummer to end on.
Yeah, I know. All right, folks. There you go. That's the story of the Moonlight Killer, the Texarkana Phantom. Let us know your thoughts on this case down below. It's pretty mad.
Yeah, who do you think it was?
Yeah.
Do you know who it was? Let us know.
Let us know in the comments below. All right, folks. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon in the next whole episode of the podcast.
And I'll see you.
All right. Thanks, folks. Bye.
Can you tell who was on our 20-euro bill?
No. I actually don't recognize any of the euro bills. It's like some arch column in Rome or some bullshit.
No, I haven't got a clue either.
Okay. I don't think you asked it. I could have said anything and you wouldn't know.
It's just funny that you know the US, but you don't know ours.
Yeah, but it has faces. I recognize faces. I don't recognize buildings. And all the buildings and euro notes look all the same. It's all some Roman shit.
Oh, I'm thinking of the... Okay. Scratch all that.
What are you thinking?
I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, scratch all that.
Moving on.
Take all that out, Regina. Thank you.